Hi, my name is Anthony Gibbs, and I come to you today from my bedroom studio, as it were. Let's get a little closer here. So the purpose of this video is to kind of talk more a little bit about what's coming up next in my series of education videos. I see that the Knights of the Golden Circle have become, well, it's the most watched thing on my channel. And I certainly appreciate any and all people who have sat down and watched that little exposition about the Knights of the Golden Circle. Coming up next in the near future, I'm not quite sure when, but I'm hoping in a month or two, no later than, maybe a little sooner if I get ambitious with it. I will have another detailed video at a board of some kind. This one about the Knights of the Golden Circle. I also wanted to do a little something on slavery because I've had a fair amount of arguments here with well, actually one particular argument that was very vehement and violent about the nature of slavery, and there is this notion that slavery was purely about black people and the destruction of black people and subjugation of black people. And I guess that's true if you look at it from a surface perspective, because here in America, indeed that's the case. I'm reading, I've been reading several books about slavery over the past 10, 11 months here, and all of them seem to be about, at their core, um, like the use of black people and keeping them down so they can remain in that place, and others who use that labor can remain in their place. Now that might all be true, but the problem lies in the fact that slavery is just not that simple. It never was that simple. Its origins are not that simple. I'm starting to think that the reason why they why they called it the peculiar institution was not just because they wanted some euphemism. They didn't want to say up front that they were enslaving people and hurting them. They called it the peculiar institution because it was indeed peculiar to America. Slavery was conducted differently wherever it was. It had some basic components to it that were the same. The capturing of mainly African peoples to be set to work or set to be used however it needed to be used. But for example, if you look at in Brazil, manumission was a lot more common for many slaves than it was in the Americas, and there was not a notion really of, well, except for when slaves ran to the jungle and formed their own little cities or societies, whatever, tried to, within the cities and towns, you had free blacks, commingling with the slaves, and one didn't know necessarily from a distance if one was slave or not, but there wasn't an assumption that black person was slave, because he very well could not be. And so the whites who dealt with them. Now, I'm not saying it was all roses and peaches. I'm pretty certain it wasn't. It wasn't the kind of interaction. They weren't sitting around like discussing like the local events over coffee, or maybe they were with a few blacks, maybe. But there was no notion of, if I see you walking about and you're black, you're a slave. That notion was not there. you know. And furthermore, in Brazil, if a person decided to want to go for their freedom, and they managed to sit down with their master and come up with the price of their manumission, that got set once you went to a notary or some person like that, and it could not be changed. And, they couldn't sell that slave and be like, oh, now the price is more, or for that matter, it's less. It's what the price was set, and that slave had every opportunity to work up to that point and save that money. While over here, I mean, while over here, as you come north, you know, Britain had freed their slaves in the 1830s. The exact date when they freed all the slaves, I don't have that in mind, and I apologize, but it was it was fairly sooner than that, you know, and the British, well, partially because the American Revolution, they wanted to hurt like the South. They said if you run, you can be free. And the fact of the matter is that the slaves who did run and fight for the British, those that survived, left with the rest of the Tories to go to the Caribbean or Canada or back to the continent. So so there was a difference in there. We I think in general with history we have to erase this monolithic kind of view of history that we have, that history occurred in this one way or mainly in this fashion, and everything else that occurred was so minimal that is insignificant to even think about. It's almost the opposite. Things varied between people, between regions. As I read, there were slave owners that threw weddings for their slaves and things like that, who kept the slave's family all nearby, and they were fine with the slave having his family nearby, and they weren't trying to sell you off because they didn't want you to lose your family, and they actually did give a fuck about that. While there were slave owners that sell you mama tomorrow up the river, or down the river, be more bad, than they say. But to be slave, I mean, it varied on the human beings that kept you and the manner of work you did. Like, for example, if you were a slave and you were a woodworker and you had a skill set and what you did was important, you may not be suffering like the person who's working, say, in the cane field. And that's just nothing but hard work, and it's deadly work. Slaves died behind that. There was one account on how this lady who was a cane worker, she was walking around with her master's baby in her belly, sitting there trying to work up in the cane field, all live long day. She had a baby, she barely had the energy to suckle the baby because she had worked in the cane field all day. And this lady was cruel, you know. But but I find it really fascinating that many slaves, like when they interviewed them after slavery, the ones that are alive still, the ethnographers who gave a shit, like, and people who gave a shit enough to actually go find these slaves and talk to them before they passed, or these ex-slaves rather, before they passed away. A lot of them use language like "my white people," "my white folks." Now one might, like especially nowadays, I mean, I guess that's good in the sense that like we've had people like Muhammad Ali recently passed, God rest his soul, and people like Malcolm X and people like those who were vehement about not liking, how can I put it? They're vehement about not liking this affection uh, between the subjugator and the subjected, and that the very nature of this, even when it seems positive, is an insult, is a slight. is a condescension, basically, and I guess that's true. If you look at it, I guess that's true. But in some ways, it's a condescension to those slaves who had to live every day during that time. It's almost like with black people, especially when it comes to slavery, we want to separate ourselves away from it, and we're ashamed, like psychically, still of it. And so I think one of the end results of that is that we have very little empathy for the slave and for what the slave had to do and how the slave looks at the world. We tend to, I mean, in some respects, it's almost as insulting as it was for when whites looked at blacks and saw them as inferior. When we totally like discount what the what our slave ancestors went through, it's the same kind of discounting. It's almost validation of the treatment by the white masters, saying you are insignificant. You were nothing but a tool. What you thought about meant nothing, and we're trying to forget you as fast as you existed because your existence shames us, and I think that's unfortunate. I really do think that's unfortunate. Like, and I think in many respects, we're not ever going to come to terms with what happened here in America and as a people until we stop insulting our ancestors and stop discounting their experiences and stop having it be from a monolithic kind of view with history. Well, you know what? Since I'm here, I'll go ahead and finish up here about slavery. In slavery, you know, its origins. Just to put it back, just to bring it back here. What we know as slavery, or what America knew as slavery, the New World slavery, is merely an incarnation of what happened, in history, like way prior. I think to really understand slavery, and I'm looking at doing some writing about this later, but to really understand slavery, one has to go back to ancient times and look at it this way. In ancient times, if you had an army and you're on a march and your your objective was to capture a city, for example, you know these things are done up close and quite personal. And invariably, you capture a city or a town, you have a couple of choices. You can attempt to subjugate those people with whom you have in that town, essentially, like where you work for me now, kind of thing, and you show up and you gotta take what you want to take and you establish the order that you want to establish. That does work sometimes, especially if the peoples that you attack have similar cultures and values. You can sometimes blend it like that. Another 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 thing that could happen is you go in that city and you attack it and you just put everybody to the freaking sword, just right there, just pow, done. Want to slaughter every goddamn thing, man, woman, child, beast, dog, um, whatever. Hey, look here, could you close the curtain, please? Teddy, would you please, close the curtain? Okay, and so you have, a third option. We have a city. The third option is this: you put some folks to the sword, and you go to the sword. You keep the few around that will go along if you want to do that, and or you enslave everybody that does not move, and you sell them off to the highest bidder. And this has a couple of effects. Number one, you don't have the out and out naked cruelty of putting everybody in town to the sword. Psychologically speaking, that's tough. You know, if you gotta shove a sword through grandma's neck, that's a hard day. I don't give a fuck how bad of a man you might think you are. Like they say, like I'm from Detroit, and they talk about like all these gangsters and shit or whatever else. But hey, when they get to torturing people down in the basement, a lot of gangsters leave the road because as evil as you might be, very few have the hard black heart to sit there and do torture to somebody or to kill an innocent. Just straight up kill them with your bare hands. When you choke a pregnant woman out, when you guys have a baby, or take the baby's head and smash it against the rocks. I don't think you're gonna be the same kind of person. Most of us aren't gonna be the same kind of people after that happens. If you do that enough, it just puts a pall over society. So, in order to not perform all these kind of cruelties, it's much easier to sell the population off into slavery. And this is what happened during the time of Roman conquest. And the Romans, in many respects, is what we base our society on. And their methods of enslaving are pretty much were the basis of enslavement for centuries after that. And slavery never once was outlawed in the history of the empire from its inception as a republic to its fall as an empire. From what I gather, slavery was never abolished in the Byzantine Empire. So slavery was just there. And it was just in existence. Which leads us to the fall of the Roman Empire. Soon after the fall of the Roman Empire, you had the rise of the Muslims and East and the Near East. And they went on a conquering spree. They conquered North Africa, a lot of old Roman provinces got conquered in North Africa and the Middle East. And essentially, you had a small chunk of Byzantium kind of hanging on. And the Muslims, took over that in 1453, I think. And there was no more Byzantium or Constantinople, at least as it was. But what was the important thing in mentioning all of this? You had the notion of slavery. Arab traders, along with other slaver types, not unusual for all. If you were out slipping to get grabbed, get sold. Or if you were in Spain and they took over Spain, you could very well end up being enslaved as a white person. And slaves were kept and slaves were sold. Do you get what I'm saying? There was always been an undercurrent of this notion that a perfectly acceptable, thing to do with a populace that you conquer is to enslave them and put them to use, versus having to kill them, which expends energy and time, and psychic, and it damages you psychically, as I mentioned. So it leads to what? In 1453 sounds very much close to 1492, into the age of exploration. Indeed, you had people, especially the Portuguese, who were circumnavigating Africa around the same time too, probably bumping into Arab traders, selling you slaves here and there. And there were some slaves that were in Renaissance Europe. As a matter of fact, one of the princes of Venice, I do believe, was the result of the big man and a slave. And this dude's name was Alfonso. And I read about this dude in the book, in the book called "The Age of Charles V and the Supremacy of the Habsburg Empire." And if any book doesn't want to get into black people or whatever, you probably get that one. But they mentioned this dude and made sure to mention he was black and made sure to mention that he was one of the princes, and he shared in his family, like inheritance. So this notion of slavery, it was there, which leads us to the exploration of the New World. What brought slaves over here mainly? At first, when you had slavery here, probably a few slaves sold here, a few slaves sold there, but they were still working under the old Roman code. And part of Roman code is the idea of manumission, that a person can set a price for freedom, and then they can buy off that freedom. And society more or less kind of has to honor that. It's like part of the social contract, kind of, in an easy one, that even a lowly slave should have a shot at something. So so when you had slavery in the New World and you brought over only a few slaves at a time, you know, owned by a few different people, there wasn't this uneasiness with a slave kind of earning his freedom. And indeed, they weren't brought over in bulk, really, up until what? Sugar. Sugar, in this book right here, illustrates it. The comparative histories of slavery in Brazil, Cuba, United States of America. Uh, this book makes it clear, and another book that makes it clear as well, Tome, which of course is not anywhere nearby. Here it is. This book by Henry Louis Gates Jr., Black in Latin America. Those books make it clear. I mean, because even Cortez had one of his main soldiers with him when he was conquering the Mexicans was a black dude, a slave soldier. He fought right next to Cortez, seeing the same type of opportunities that Cortez saw. So this thing is complex. So getting back to slavery and sugar. Sugar was the main thing that changed the nature and complexity of slavery. Sugar essentially required a large amount of slaves to work at one time. And essentially, it was backbreaking and grueling work that would kill you. But to keep the sugar going, they just kept importing more guys and 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 more guys still. Yeah, coffee is a similar type of need too for a lot of people. I mean, hell, if you look at Cuba, they were importing guys up to 1878 to keep working the sugar, and the British, and the French, and Saint Dominique, which became Haiti later, and the British, and the British Caribbean, in Jamaica. I mean, they brought over 1.9 million slaves over a span of 100 between the years of 17 and 1800, 16, 1700. We brought over millions of people. And what happens is, once you have a large scale amount of Africans brought over, then you see the elements of what we kind of became to know as the peculiar institution, meaning more restrictions, less of a chance for freedom, a lot more of a crueler slavery. Um, Whites became much more concerned about large amount of black people congregating in one place, especially up north. And so they made it so that free blacks just couldn't commingle around the South anymore, like the way they could commingle down in Brazil with slaves. If you were a free black, you were best to go north. because someone can recapture you and burn your papers, and who the hell knows? And I'm sure it happened on more than one occasion. So, so to summarize here, slavery in America is a multifaceted thing. We must remove the notion that slavery was a monolithic thing. Slavery became the way it was due to a large need for cheap labor. Before that, slavery was on a much smaller scale, and it was done to anyone, white, black, green, or purple. When you had a production of sugar, and you had you know and a couple with the exploration of the African continent and contact with the Arab slave traders, I theorize that's when you had the notions of the peculiar institution. That it was about keeping black people down. It was about having theories that black people were inferior. It was about the eventual destruction and or neutering of the black race. Okay, I can buy all that if you talk about a specific kind of slavery, large scale industrial slavery, needing a lot of cheap labor at one time. Not you have a few servants, or you have your household servants and a few guys who work outside and you maintain your house. That's a lot different than you have an industrial operation of cotton or sugarcane or coffee or, or or rice or something that requires a lot of work and is dangerous, hot, and sweaty. You know, so and you can see it now with Jamaica. Why are there so many black folks in Jamaica? Because they brought all those folks there for sugar. Why are so many black folks in Haiti? Because they brought them there for sugar. Why are so many black folks in Brazil? Because they brought them there for sugar. If you look at other places around the New World, they required a large amount of slavery for industrial purposes. You saw much smaller populations of blacks who were treated a lot better. And keep in mind that during the same time in the 1500s, 1600s, when they were bringing slaves over and all this stuff started, they were enslaving people on the continent. Again, I bring up the book Charles V and the History of the Habsburg Empire, where they talked about how they had a population of attacking near France and Belgium in that area, and Lord who won got pissed and just straight up enslaved everybody. And it said, quote, to the cruelest slavery, end quote. Something along that line. I shouldn't say quote unquote. I'm not really sure, but something to the effect of he put him to the rod. That shit was not right. It was rough and tumble. And these are white people on white people. White on white crime. So anyway, just again to summarize, slavery was and is a multifaceted thing. Slavery then and now was not about just white black people. Slavery then, as it is now, is a function of convenience. It's a function of I don't want to say necessity. That's really shitty. Um, it's like Machiavellian math. That's the best way I can put it. You're along this path now, so the equation equals enslavement. You could play the game of ruthlessness. So anyway, I like to say if anybody wants to talk about slavery or challenge this, I'd be happy to talk about it, and I'll be bringing out more stuff about the Knights of the Golden Circle here soon. in more detail. So thank you and have a good day.